In just a few moments, Terry Lovelace will join me for the second time on the show to cover some things from his follow-on book to the incident at Devil's Den. In the new book, Terry gets more in-depth on the tragic life and death of his friend Toby after their 1977 UFO abduction encounter at Devil's Den State Park. Terry also discusses his conversations with Sue, an ET hybrid-like mother figure who shared many interesting things with him during his 1987 abduction encounter, and how a cousin of his had very similar abduction experiences to him, but with a very tragic ending. For the second time on the show is Terry Lovelace. Terry served for 6 years in the Air Force as a medic and EMT and practiced law for many years, and finally retiring as an assistant attorney general for the state of Vermont. In 1997, while serving in the Air Force, Terry and his friend Toby had a UFO abduction experience while camping in Devil's Den State Park. Terry is author of the book Incident at Devil's Den, and now his new follow-on book, Devil's Den, The Reckoning, which has now reached bestseller status on Amazon. Terry speaks at numerous UFO conferences and events throughout the U.S. And Terry, congratulations on the success of the new book, and welcome back to the show.
Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, it's exciting to have you back, and I was happy to see that you put out the new book. There was so much good information in the first one, but you kind of delved into some things in this one that you hadn't covered in the first one, which I thought that was interesting. A little bit about your cousin Gerald and some experiences he had. You went into a little bit more detail. Well, you covered a lot of other cases that people had shared with you as well. A little bit more detail on some other things you hadn't covered in the first book, which I liked. And I wanted to get back, if we could kind of set the stage here, Terry, because I know you've been experiencing this all your life. And this goes back to a young age. Maybe you could start with, when is the first memory of this happening? When did you remember this first occurring?
The first memory, the earliest memory that I have, I would have been probably 4 years old. I could have been as young as 3, but I want to say 4. And I remember being at night, finding myself in this round room with a gray, like a padded floor. And I would be there with other kids. But they weren't kids from the neighborhood. They weren't kids that I knew. At 3 or 4, I didn't know many, but I knew a few. But that happened on and off for a couple of years, where at odd times I'd be by myself in this room, and it was always the same group of kids. And interestingly, as hard as it may sound to believe, we spoke telepathically and communicated telepathically. And there was always a woman there, a petite Asian woman, who kind of ran things. And I called her Sue. And I believe that goes back to when we lived in St. Louis, in back of our home, just across the street, there was an Asian woman from Japan named, she was called Sue by everybody. My mother called her Sue. We saw her at church. And so that she reminded me of Sue, I guess. So I called her Sue, but she would be
easy thing to do, right?
Easy thing to do, yeah.
Association.
And she has been a part of my life on and off ever since. So, and I've talked to a lot of people that tell me that they've had, quote, handlers. I've never liked that term, never used that term myself. But I've had
that kind of sounds like a spy term, a handler.
It does. Yeah, it does. I don't care for the name, but I've heard it a lot, that they have one entity, one being that seems to like accompany them throughout their life. In the back of Incident at Devil's Den, I put my email address, and I said, look, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a counselor or anything, but if you've had an experience and you'd like to share it with somebody, you can share it with me in strictest of confidence, and I promise I'll answer your email. And I thought I might get 50 emails. And as of this morning, I have 1,571 that I've received.
Wow. So people are still just sharing their stories now, especially with the new book?
Yes. That led to an uptick. And But the real reason I want to bring that up is because I discovered that I'm not nearly as unique as I may have thought I was. There's a whole lot of people out there that have lived through exactly the same thing, and it's a lot more pervasive than what we think. And these people, there's a thread of commonality that runs through all of them. They'll typically start out by saying, you're going to think this is crazy, or I know this sounds insane, but this really happened to me, kind of a semi-apologetic thing. And then they'll transition into telling me just miraculous stories. I chose, there's a core group of about 400 stories that are just very, very credible. And I made contact with almost every one of those people and asked about using their story in my book. And then from that pool, I kind of pared it down to the best 50, and then from the best 50 down to the best 30. So in the back of the book are the best 30 stories that other people have shared with me out of 1,571. So, and it's a kind of across the board. It's like near-death experiences and just a lot of strange, anomalous things that had dramatic impact.
Now, Terry, did you were a lot of these stories that were shared with you, shared in the book, did they have some similarities to you and what you remember from your experiences?
Boy,
Some of these?
a lot of them. I have almost 100 from people that say, I have a memory of a dream, or I have a memory of this happening from age 4. And I had this memory with crystal clarity, and vivid color. And I can remember this from being 4 years old, but I can't remember the Christmases, the birthday parties, the family vacations. Any of that other stuff is all fuzzy around the edges and faded or gone. But this stupid dream has stayed with me and is as fresh in my mind today as it was when I was 5 years old. So.
Now, these beings that you experienced as a young child in your room, I think you referred to them as kind of almost like small monkeys, yellow eyes. But I think you said you think this is a screen memory. Now, can you talk about, because you also talk about Gerald and your cousin Gerald, and how you were talking with him, and you both started talking about your experiences, or maybe he had already known about your experiences and started to share his. How similar was his experiences to what you had been experiencing?
Incredibly similar. And, I intended I wrote that chapter for publication in Incident at Devil's Den. And the editor was like, you talk enough about your childhood. Why don't you focus more on the abduction event? So I did. I felt bad about that because I felt that Gerald's story is very important. It's important because his story bolsters mine and vice versa. And in that core group of 100 people that had entities in their rooms, there were a few people that saw monkeys and clowns and owls, lots of owls and little gray men and orbs of light. And one of the stories is from a now 7-year-old boy from El Paso, Texas, who had a possum that would walk into his room. He said that I talked to him on the phone. He said the possum walked upright like a man and would talk to him with his mind. And I was well, what did he tell you? And he says, once he leaves, I really don't remember. And I asked him, do you think he's frightening? Does he scare you? And he says, no, not really. Sometimes a little, but he said that and the mother saw this. The mother, because the kid would scream, have these screaming nightmares. And the mother positioned the sofa where she could, lay down, watch TV, but keep an eye through his bedroom door. And she saw an orb of light come in through the window screen at like 3 a.m. And then she was out. So she doesn't know what happened after that. So clowns, even one lady said Disney characters. I think that these things have the ability to be, to present themselves as a screen memory. and in a way that the child will find most benign and non-threatening. So that's that's how it works.
Yeah, that's interesting because I've heard that a number of times too, about the screen memories and them presenting themselves in a different light, perhaps. And the other thing that I think's interesting about this is the time loss, or a lot of people forget about the experiences. Sometimes it's brought back through regression. How did you recall some of this, Terry? Was some of this recalled back through hypnotic regression, or did you just simply remember some of this happening as you got older?
I've never been regressed yet. I'm talking to Yvonne Smith and Kathleen Martin, and I may do that. I want to have that done someday, and I think that might be healing. But I'm not too eager to experience it. I'm kind of afraid of what's going to be seen. But I'm told it's very therapeutic to have done. So I had memories as a young child, and a lot of this stuff stuck with me in the form of nightmares that I had. For instance, one of the common nightmares I had was that these four little monkeys would appear in my room. And, at first I thought they were kind of comical, and they would always ask me, there's crystal clarity in my head, you want to come with us and play? And the one monkey that was close, they were always four, and the one that was closest to the head of my bed would hold out like a paw, almost like a dog's paw it looked like, or a monkey paw. It was not, it's what it looked like what you would expect. And in my nightmares, which I've had the same nightmare for years, I'm back as a child in this room, and this thing holds out its hand, and it's not a hand at all. It's four long, ugly fingers. And for some reason, that just flips me out. I wake up with a scream and have a lot of trouble getting back to sleep. I think that they can hide this stuff. They can do a screen memory. They can suppress it. But I think for a lot of people over the years, it just filters up. It just filters up into your conscious memory. And for people that aren't equipped, I think, to process it and recognize it for what it is, I think it can lead to, maybe mental illness, maybe alcoholism, maybe have all kinds of negative consequences. So it's good to get it out in the open and discuss it.
Yeah, and it's very tragic, and you mention it in the book about what happened to Gerald. And you also talked about how the family was not really accepting of, well, both your experiences initially and then the experiences he was having. And I think the parents kind of referred to it as demonic, perhaps demonic experiences he was having.
Oh. Yeah, they took the poor kid to church, and they, got him up in front of the congregation, and they did a laying of hands on him, and prayed for him. And now, I'm not anti-religious here. I'm not critical of that because that's not in my culture. But I'm sure that the intentions were right. But the effect was that it left Gerald feeling that it was his fault, that in some way he had sinned and had brought these demons into his life and his family's life. So I'm sure that wasn't their intent, but that was the result. And I saw him as a very, very upset, very depressed little boy of 8. 11 years later, he took his life. So that's what happens.
Yeah, and now, Terry, had you still been speaking with him about his experiences fairly recently before that occurred? I mean, were you still speaking with him about, was he talking with you about his experiences not long before that occurred, or had it been some time before you had spoke with him?
It had been probably 3 years. When we both turned 16, he quit going on the family visits. I'm sure we were both interested in girls and other things. And but we still had a friendship, and we'd still talk on the phone once or twice a year. And he was enjoying a hiatus from the clowns. I mean, they, like me, they stopped for a period of time, and I didn't know that. I found out later, of course, that they had returned with a vengeance when he was about 18, and that was probably the catalyst, because even at 18, no one there. I don't think he had the support that I had. While I maybe didn't have the most belief, I wasn't really believed, but I wasn't shunned or criticized. I had some amount of support. My sisters were somewhat supportive, and he had none of that.
Yeah, that's it's tragic. It really is. I wanted to talk about, because you kind of had this period of lull where nothing happened. How much time transpired? You had the 1977 incident at Devil's Den you and Toby experienced. How much time you think had transpired before you had an experience prior to that?
I can tell you 11 years. I had experiences. If you discount the multiple experiences I had between 4 and 8 years of age out of my bedroom, in 1963, I was 8 years old, and I was in our backyard in St. Louis, Missouri, and I saw a flying saucer. I was, shooting arrows into a bale of hay, looking down. I saw this circular shadow move across my feet, and I looked up, and there was this circular saucer made out of some kind of, silver, aluminum-like material, and just wobbling a little bit in the breeze directly over my head. It was curious. When I saw that, there was a distinct, I don't know if I covered this last time we talked or not. I don't think so. There was a distinct auditory change where, we were in this kind of an urban environment, and the noises of the neighborhood, the cars, dogs, cats, men mowing grass, all that, all those sounds, the sound was like I had my hands pressed over my ears. They became muffled and muted. And it was just an odd sensation that went along with the sighting. It lasted just a few seconds. And then I was 8 years old then. 3 years later, at age 11, I woke up in the middle of the night and saw a saucer outside my bedroom window, second-story bedroom window, in the middle of the night. Never told a soul about that. And then I had 11 years of nothing. 11 years of nothing that I remember anyway. So,
yeah, that's interesting. Now, how do you think your experiences as a child may tie in, or do you think they tie in with the experience you had in 1977?
I have to think there's a connection. I don't know what that connection is. I know that the entity that I called Sue as a child, that I called Betty in later experience, they're one and the same they're one and the same entity.
Right.
And I think I even said that I admitted that I had a strong affection for her, in a maternal way. I didn't see her aboard this thing that they took us on in 1977, this giant triangle thing. She wasn't there. And, I'd like to think that she wasn't a part of that, because I consider her to kind of be, I still had that maternal feeling for her, like she wouldn't betray me or and I hope that that's right, but, it's hard to know.
Now, from the 1977 incident, you just kind of recall bits and pieces of that, and I know you documented this in the first book, how OSI had come in and questioned you, and they had questioned Toby, and then ultimately had went through some, I believe it was kind of hypnosis and questioning, and I think what you referred to it as, that they administered to you, was some sort of truth serum. What do you just recall very little bits and pieces of that event to this day, or how does that kind of what is in your memory from that event as you were on the craft?
Okay, that's a great question. And let me be clear, I only have bits and pieces. I mean, I've never had a clear linear memory of what happened to me inside of there. But I can tell you what I remember, and I have some memories. And I think that faulty OSI investigation, what I did was I knew that I couldn't resist the drug. And it's sodium amytal, by the way, and it was commonly administered by the OSI in the 70s and 60s. So sodium amytal is a short-acting hypnotic, and when they administer it, it's like, I mean, bam, you are in a different place. And they call it a hypnotic for a reason. And I could, that under the influence of that drug, I was able to recall, in a way, it was like watching a mental movie. I felt a little bit detached from it, like I was watching it on a screen or something. And it brought back memories that I don't think I would have had but for that interrogation. The first memory that I have is standing inside the craft, and they had taken our clothes off, and I was holding my hands and my boots between my arms like this, and we were frozen. I could move my eyeballs around, but I couldn't move my head. I couldn't move anything. I was just paralyzed. And Toby was similarly situated to my left, and I heard a woman screaming. One of the things that became a central part of a nightmare for 40 years was, and it was probably the scariest thing that I saw in the memory that I have of being aboard this thing, was that there was a taller being that was about 6 foot tall, wasn't one of the grays, had a pinkish white chalkish complexion, and he would walk across my field of vision, and again, I couldn't turn my head. And there were a lot of the little gray guys running around all over the place, and they seemed to all be purpose-driven. They were doing something. They weren't just standing around idle. They were doing something. And but this guy seemed to be in charge. And I'm straining my eyes as far to the left as I can, and he just turns his head, and by happenstance, we locked eyes. And that was the scariest part of being aboard this ship, because the guy was in my head, and I don't know how else to describe it. You know, if telepathic thoughts can be perceived in your head, I perceive this guy as being very invasive. You know, very. It was a violation of my privacy, because this guy was just in my head. He knew me. He knew my wife. He knew my plans, my secrets. He knew everything about me in an instant. And I think he took that information, or a copy of that information, or whatever. And what I got reflected back from his eyes was just intellect, and it was humbling, and it was frightening. You know, and it's very similar to, like, my dog will come over and put her head in my lap, and I'll pet her on top of the head and say, you know, good girl, rub her ears. And she's an English setter with big brown eyes, and she looks up at me, and you know, those eyes radiate loyalty and trust and love. But at the same time, she knows I'm the alpha in the equation, and I provide her with her needs. And in this exchange with this entity, I felt like I was the dog. It was just a really humbling experience. Because whatever this guy is, he's 500 rungs up the evolutionary ladder from me. I felt like a very inferior being.
Right.
And that's frightening. That's just frightening.
I want to try and share the screen here and see if we can pull up an image. I think this is an artist's conception of the craft that you witnessed at Devil's Den.
Yes.
And the triangular craft, it looks very large, and I think you talk about this in the book, but what size are we talking about roughly as you remember it?
I remember it as being a city block on each leg of the triangle. You know, it was equivalent to a Walmart. I mean, it was absolutely enormous. And it filled that entire plateau, that entire top of that I call it a meadow, but it filled that entire space. And if you look at the image, I drew this about 3 months after the event. I drew it in a loose leaf binder on ruled paper, and for purposes of the book, I took that original image and then I carefully redrew it on some art paper using a ruler and a marker to make a decent representation. But it's taken directly from the original 1977 drawing. I didn't change anything. In the lower left corner, you'll see there's a representation. There's a little automobile, 2 stick figures, and a tent. And I drew that to try to give some indication of size.
Yeah, this thing looks massive. I mean, it
was deep.
Massive.
It wasn't only big, it was deep. And when we first saw it, we couldn't really tell the depth of it because it was 3,000 feet over our heads. So it wasn't until the following morning that we really got a good look at what it was. And it was big. It was big. It was deep, It wasn't 1 or 2 stories tall. It was probably 5 stories tall. So in that regard, it was probably more like a medical building than it was a Walmart. And curiously, if you talk to Dave Marler, who's wrote the book on triangles, in the Hudson Valley in 1977, there were a series of sightings of this type of vehicle that other people had described in the same words I used as being 5 stories tall.
Wow. So they also witnessed triangular type craft in the Phoenix Lights incident. I'm wondering if those may have been kind of similar to what appeared here.
I bet. I've looked at that. That's a really interesting case. And, a whole lot of people saw that. And, but not a whole lot of people talk about it or came forward about it. And not as many as you would think. I mean, you would think it would be some more talked about than what it was. Of course, it didn't help that, what's the name, Simon Fife? The governor.
Yeah, Fife Symington. Yeah, the former governor, yes.
Yeah, made light of it by dressing up his aide as an alien. And
yeah, and then came out on Larry King in 2007 and said what he saw was not of this earth, after he had already stepped out of politics. So, which is interesting. Well, so I want to pull up Terry, I want to go ahead and pull up an image of the site, and this was compliments, I think you said, of Astonishing Legends when you were on their show.
Yes.
They actually pulled this image up on Google Earth, and now and I think this is more of a present day photo, is it not?
That is a present day photo. Yeah, if you read in my book, they went based a lot on the descriptions of where we went and what we saw. Toby and I walked the perimeter of this thing, and in the first book, from the ground level, it looked more horseshoe shaped. But what amazed me was, this is 40 years later. That thing should be covered with 40-year-old mature trees by now, but it's not. It's clear cut. And if you blow up that Google Earth image, you can see their actual, as a matter of fact, I had a landscaper friend on Facebook message me and say that he can see tractor tires and he can tell that it's cut by a tractor pulling what's called a brush hog. And they keep the top of that plateau clear cut. Now, there are some buildings nearby that weren't there when we were there, but this is still restricted land that's owned by the Bureau of Land Management. It's not part of Devil's Den. And my question would be, why would you clear cut a plateau in the middle of nowhere? And that's a lot of gas to burn over 50 years. Doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense.
Unless you're setting up some telescopes or something up there, that have a purpose. It certainly does beg the question, why would they do that? Yeah. So there's another image I wanted to pull up here, and this was, I believe, on your Incident at Devil's Den Facebook site of an ET. I think you said a friend of yours had drawn this or created this. Was this of one of the entities that you had witnessed on the craft, or similar to one of the entities?
Yes. Uh, I can't see the exact one you're talking about, but I'm pretty sure I know which one you mean. And that's a pretty fair representation. You know, people ask me a lot, what did they look like? And the best representation of ET that you could find. Ah, yes.
There we go. I had to share the screen. I apologize.
The artist on this is Ronnie Kinsella from England, and Ronnie is a talented artist. His twin brother, Philip Kinsella, is an experiencer and a well-published author on the topic. That's a very good representation of the more so of the tall guy, the pinkish guy that I saw. Only he had a smoother complexion. His eyes were a little bit larger, but not exaggerated large. His mouth was smaller, just a slit. But the pointy chin, the eyebrow ridge, make the eyes a little larger, almost like wraparound Ray-Bans. And that is the whitish pink guy that I made eye contact with that, left me with nightmares for 40 years. Just image.
Now, Terry, could you see the plateau image that I displayed just a minute ago?
I can.
Okay, yeah. I just wanted to make sure of that so I wasn't sure if I was sharing the screen when I had pulled that image up. Yeah, so the other thing I wanted to talk about, because I think you mentioned in the book there's been some missing cases there at Devil's Den. David Paulides has written extensively about missing people. I think he had even written about this park as well and some of the missing people. To your knowledge, how many people have went missing there?
That's a very difficult question to answer. Without some cooperation from the park department, you're never going to be able to discern anything. I'll tell you how I found out. What I focused on was 1 year. I focused on the year 2017. And during that 1 year, I subscribed to a Russellville, Arkansas newspaper, and I read it every day, and I looked for stories involving Devil's Den. And so 2017 is kind of a snapshot. Incident at Devil's Den about little Catherine Van Alst, who went missing at age 7, and they found her on the 7th day of the search. And she had been in the woods for 7 days and 6 nights. And other than a couple bug bites, she was fine. Her story is in David Paulides' book. It's volume 4 is actually called Missing 411, The Devil is in the Details. And David Paulides talks about the occurrence of missing people in parks, federal and state, that have the word devil in the name, devil or Diablo. And he's a good researcher. He does what I did with all these emails that I got. He laid them out on an Excel spreadsheet to determine commonalities, and that's how he discovered these cluster sites. But he did an amazing job. But I wanted to, in my first book, I talked about Mr. Rodney Letterman, 32-year-old young man from Bartlesville, Oklahoma, who drove down with a friend to walk the Butterfield Trail. And that Butterfield Trail is asphalt. It's nicely paved. It's, they call it the Butterfield Trail from the Butterfield Stagecoach, which in 1859 ran right through there. And so Rodney and his friend are taking this walk along the Butterfield Trail. And they're a mile or so into their walk. And Rodney had asthma. So he says, he starts wheezing and tells his friend, I'm sorry, I left my inhaler back in the truck. Would you mind? Would you run back and grab it for me? And his friend said, sure, no worries. So his friend runs back to the truck, grabs the inhaler, and is back within 30 minutes. When he gets back, there's no Rodney Letterman. Rodney's gone. His cell phone is laying on the ground. And, people are walking by, and I talked to the guy that owned the deputy sheriff from the department that has the hounds, the tracking hounds, and they brought them in, and they were able to get a scent from the parking lot to where the phone was found, and they got a scent from the phone, but then they just sat down, and I said, well, what does that mean? And he said, well, the trail ended there. And I said, well, could he have gone back to the parking lot and got in a car with someone else? And he said, well, we investigated that, because had he walked back to the truck, number one, he was having an asthma attack. I don't think he could have done it. Even if had he been able to do that, he would have ran into his friend along the way, because his friend was to the truck and back. So I asked the guy, I said, well, where did the guy go? And he kind of hesitates and says, there's only one place he could have gone, and that's up.
Wow.
So
it's truly bizarre. And you and I were talking about this for a few minutes before we started recording here. I think his skull, they found the remains of his skull here.
I promised readers I would give them an update as soon as I knew something. And in March of 2019, a full year after I published Devil's Den, they found on the Butterfield Trail, there was a young couple walking the trail, and the young lady says to her friend, is that an albino turtle? And the friend is like, what? He looks over. Yeah, he looks over and he sees it. He says, I don't know. And they go over to check it out, and he picks it up. And when he picks it up, he realizes that it's human bone. He realizes it's part of someone's skull. And it was the very top, what the medical examiner called the crown. And it was kind of a football-shaped, ragged edges, like it had been broken. Piece of skull that had been out in the sun and bleached white in the sun. But what's curious and disturbing to this story is that, that area was searched extensively, and people walk that trail by the hundreds every day. And this skull piece was set. There was a fairly good sized log that was parallel with the path, but just a foot or two off the path. And that skull piece was set right dead center. It was staged. It was set up. It was set up somehow, and I think that just speaks to the level of bravado, and I think that's a message. We can do this whenever we want to.
It's scary. It's actually quite frightening to think about. That they scoured the woods there, looking for him, from what I'd read, for days. And I think I mentioned this to you when we were talking before. It kind of harkens back to a case I looked into or kind of read about, and that's the Todd Sees case. I had Butch Wichkowski on the show a couple of years back, and he's been researching that case for years. But same kind of story, where a guy, Todd Sees, turned up missing in Pennsylvania. Was out scouting for deer on his four-wheeler, and his four-wheeler was found, and there was no trace of him. They scoured every neck of the woods, and then days later, his body turned up 100 yards from his property, where they had went to and from scouring that area looking for him and never found a trace of him. The hound dogs, the scent dogs that were searching for him, never picked up a scent, just like this case. Yeah. And so, of course, a lot of people are asking, and there was a lot of information that was not given out, cause of death, and then they later came out and said it was a overdose. Well, everybody that knew the guy said he was a straight shooter and knew nothing about drug involvement. He was never had any trouble with the law. It just didn't add up. The bottom line is it didn't add up, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of this case. It's just so bizarre, because why wouldn't they have found some sort of trace in all the searching they did for this individual, for Rodney? It's just bizarre.
It's just just incredible. You know, all of those cases, I admire David Paulides' work. All of those cases, boy, collectively you look at it, and there are thousands of people that go missing every year under bizarre circumstances. You know, and I'm not talking about, you know, somebody being snatched by a serial killer, abducted by, you know, bad guys, or being a victim of predation. You know, I'm talking about the cases like David Paulides, you know, or someone that maybe wants to get lost. David Paulides excludes those cases whenever he does his statistical work. So we're looking at people that by the thousands go missing under incredibly weird circumstances where, you know, they're the first in line or the last in line of a string of people. You know, they could be like little Catherine Van Alst in 1946 was at the Devil's Den campsite, well within view of her mom, and her two brothers were there, and then boom, she's gone. And they find her 7 days later on top of a bluff. It's like an altitude of 800 feet over the above the campsite, miles away. No worse for the wear, you know, fully hydrated, and but no memory of what happened to her.
Wow. Yeah, it's bizarre because, yeah, this happens 10, 20 yards from other groups of people. These people just end up, they just vanish. I mean, they just simply vanish, and some of them are never returned. I know Yosemite Park's another one that's been a big cluster of these type of missing people that David Paulides talked about. But I want to get back to the story here, yours. One of the things I like that you covered in the book was you had an experience. You're on your motorcycle. It's 1987. You had mentioned in the book that it was something you did, I believe, on a Sunday. You went out on your motorcycle, you know, Sunday ride, just kind of a nice, easy ride, and something happened. And talk a little bit about that 1987 event and what occurred.
Yes, I would do that in the autumn, especially. I go out for a solo motorcycle ride on a Sunday morning early, and then get back in time to make breakfast for my wife and the kids and make pancakes. So it was kind of a tradition kind of thing for September and October, weather permitting, in Michigan. And I was out on the bike, and I was rounding a curve, and I was throttling back from about 75 to about 60 because I was approaching this kind of sharp turn. And it seemed like I just blinked my eyes, and all of a sudden I'm doing 30 on a gravel road. And I never took my bike on gravel, you know, never. And I thought, whoa, you know, missing time. The best way I can explain missing time would be like if you're part of a motion picture and somebody comes along in the editing department with a pair of scissors and cuts a 25-foot section of film out. That's the way it seemed to me, is it was an absolutely seamless event where, you know, I'm here, then I'm here, and there's nothing in the middle. But, you know, I recalled some of that under the influence of the sodium amytal, and I recalled some of that after a encounter with Betty. And I know the whole story. And what happened was, I remembered going down this road thinking, boy, I'm really absent-minded. And I remember getting off the bike. No, I remember standing next to the bike, but I don't remember actually getting off the bike. And I had my helmet in my hand. And I'm looking, and it's just, you know, 1,000 acres of corn on either side of me, you know. And I just am confused, and I thought, well, my bike is headed this way. If I turn around, this should take me back to where I came from. But then the memory of what really happened is that I saw a saucer that was maybe 50 feet in diameter off the road that came down low over the road. It didn't set down, but it got low, and a ramp came down. And I walked up, and I walked into this thing. And just like with the ship in 1977 that we were on, I for years I wondered, was that the real inside of the thing, or did they take us somewhere else? Because the inside of this thing looked so much bigger than it looked like from the outside. And I've had other people tell me they experienced the same thing. But on this occasion, when I went into the saucer up the ramp of my own accord, walked right in, Betty was there, the entity that I knew as Betty, the same entity that I called Sue when I was, 4 to 8 years old, was there. And we chatted and talked, and it was like seeing an old friend. And this is hard it was hard to write about. It's hard to talk about because it just is so incredible. People want to say, oh, you're making that up. And I kind of have empathy for that because I know it is so unbelievable, but I tell it because it is the truth. And that is that we went to some other ship. And this is what Betty referred to as the big ship. And she said that it was so large that it could never transit in front of the face of the full moon because it'd be seen. And when we were speaking telepathically, first thing crossed my mind is people with telescopes. And she said, no, it's big enough that it could be seen from Earth with your eyes. And she said 150 kilometers in length and 50 kilometers high. That's incredible dimensions. And I was aboard this thing and standing with her in front of this enormous panel of light or a window that looked out into a trillion stars that weren't blinking. So we were out of the Earth's atmosphere at least. And we were standing there looking at it, and I'm thinking, this is beautiful. And from my right, this enormous white thing, it was the moon. And I had no idea. I thought we were in a warehouse. I didn't know what we were in because I felt no sensation of motion. And this thing kind of rolled over, and it scared me to death because I thought it was going to hit us. And Betty knew that I was scared, and she said, no, the moon is where it's supposed to be. We're the ones that are moving, so there's no reason to be afraid. It's not going to hit us. And then this craft turned, and I could see a very distinct line where there was the bright side of the moon, and then a curved line where the darkness began. And there was no transition. It was a bright line difference between the side that was lit and the side that was dark. And the ship must have turned, although I didn't feel anything, because the stars went out of our view, and all I could see was black. So what had done is the ship had turned, so that we were now looking at the dark side of the moon, facing the surface, not facing out in the sky anymore. That's why all we saw was black. It was like ink, black paint or something. And we traveled for a time, and then I saw a couple of squiggles of white light, and I saw 3 lights in formation, and then I saw a glow of light, and we flew over this base that's on the far side of the moon. And everyone says, oh, that's ridiculous. The Russians have been across there, and so have the Chinese and India, and everybody has been around the far side of the moon, and nobody's said anything about a base being there. But, I'm here to tell you what I saw looked like LAX at night. As a matter of fact, I recall thinking, this is, number one, this is incredible, but number two, something doesn't look right. Something doesn't ring true. And what it was I realized that there were no streets, there were no parking lots, there were no cars. It was just, bad zoning or something. It was just this hodgepodge, this collection of buildings. And the largest, the tallest building I saw was kind of mushroom shaped. And it had windows in it. And it was brightly lit from the inside. And I don't know at what altitude we were at. But I asked Betty, how tall is that? And she said 1.5 kilometers, which would be about a mile.
Wow.
So that's my memory.
That is
I believe
enormous.
Yeah.
Now, I think you were taken aback at first too, because you told the story of some additional things that she told you about the moon, about the fact that you know, there were humans inhabiting it. There were a couple of different, I think, alien ET species. That was interesting too, I thought, because there was even more information she shared with you as well about the fact that I think some of the fact that there had been humans there for a number of years. There was some sort of alliance, and I think there was mention of the 1955 Eisenhower, supposed Eisenhower meeting, or maybe that was something you pulled into, may have been part of the story. But can you share a little bit about that? Because I thought that was quite fascinating as well.
Sure.
And I think as you talked about it in the book, even you were almost disbelieving of what you were being told here, but this is what was being relayed to you.
That this is what, and I mean, could I be lied to? Could I be deceived? Yeah, I could. But I'll just objectively report without embellishment. What she said to me plainly was that humans have been on the moon now for 2 generations. And she says that they work in service to their country or the earth. And she just draws no distinction between nations. She just refers to the earth collectively, I guess meaning all nations. But she says some people in this service will, like true civil servants, having been one I know, will go and work their entire lifetime on the moon by choice. And she said that the moon is a hollow vessel, that it's full of ETs. And she said specifically they were reptilians. And that there were many species there in this city. And the object of the exercise was they were all there to mine the rocks for helium-3. Helium-3 is a gas that's very rare on Earth, but there's a lot of it trapped in the rock on the moon. And helium-3 is important because it can be used as fusion material in a reactor, and it produces no radioactive waste. Waste is water. So it's a very, very valuable asset. And, they wouldn't have to haul the rocks back, which are heavy. They could process the stuff right there on the moon and just bring the gas back, which would weigh very little. But she said that many different species of aliens are there, that they all kind of have a loose agreement to just kind of stay out of each other's way. And that seems to work. She said that the moon is a hollow vessel, but in the inside, that's where these things live. And, I found there's a book written in 1901 by Jules Verne called The First Men in the Moon, not on the moon, but in the moon, First Men in the Moon. And I never knew this book existed. And if you look it up, it's still in print. You can buy it. But it talks about the first men to arrive at the moon discover that it's a hollow vessel and that it's full of insectoid-like creatures. And Jules Verne wrote that in 1901, which I think is amazing.
It's almost like it was prophetic, right?
Sure enough, yeah.
Wow. Yeah, it's interesting because you do hear a lot of stories about, even like the likes of Michael Salla that talks about secret space program. I had Carrie Lynn Cassidy on the show. It's done a lot of research on that, and a lot of claims of whistleblowers that have said we've inhabited the moon, we've inhabited Mars, and it is it's a tough, hard to believe. But then you hear of things like trillions and trillions of dollars that have gone unaccounted for missing in the DoD budget. And, you hear other bits and pieces of information, and sometimes you have to wonder, is there something to the story here about a secret space program that's completely separate from the NASA program, and, whether we have already traveled to these places.
Well, and Betty told me as much. And she said that, the public space program that NASA has, and she used the example of the shuttle, which is kind of outdated now. Shuttles are retired. But she said there is a public face to the space program that allows people to have some kind of feeling of pride, that there's some kind of accomplishment. But she said also, that man has not left Earth's orbit in 50 years. And I never really thought about that, but that's sure true. We've never been back to the moon. And, there's Edgar Mitchell. There's a whole slew of astronauts that, you can tell by their silence on the topic and their reticence to talk about the topic. I think that that they probably know a lot more than the average person. I'm sure they do.
Right. Yeah, Edgar Mitchell was certainly a big proponent of believing that Roswell happened, and that just overall in the big cover-up that's been going on for, say, over 70 years now. I wanted to get to the story because you cover a little bit more about Toby and what happened after the 1977 incident, how you guys were separated. I mean, you covered some of that in the first book, but you got in a little bit more detail on that. Another tragic situation, what happened with him, and you became separated, didn't talk to him for years, and then you tried to look him up, and it was interesting because you talked about the FBI friend that helped you try and locate him, and he relayed to you that Toby had been killed, and then your research down the road, you determined that it happened way after, I think it was 2007 time frame.
September 4th, 2007 is the date that he came.
Yeah. Which is really bizarre. What did you ever talk to that individual again, or was you ever able to find that FBI person and ask them why they had lied to you, or why he had told you that?
I really would like to know. I mean, the conclusion I draw is that somewhere on the federal level, there's probably a file with my name on it and Toby's name on it, saying these two guys can't get together. I talked to Robert Hastings quite a bit. As a matter of fact, he wrote a foreword. I'm going to reissue my second book with his foreword in it, because he says that that's extremely common, that they will separate these two people or five people, whatever. If a group of people see this happen and they're on active duty, they will be separated. They'll have orders cut at light speed, and they'll do what they can to make sure that these two individuals, three individuals, however many are involved, don't get together again. And, I guess that makes sense. A whistleblower is bad enough, but if you have five with a shared event, then you've got something like Ray Fowler's book about the Allagash Four. That's believable, in that you've got four people, like the witnesses to Travis Walton's event. There were 7 people, I think, in the truck that saw that. All of them passed a polygraph, as did the Allagash people. So, yeah, I think the government had a vested interest in not letting us get together, because, we could have wrote a very credible story and turned it over to National Enquirer, and maybe I'd made $1 million and been on an island now. But that didn't happen, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's tragic too. And so you dealt with the death of your cousin Gerald, and then eventually found out about Toby. And you see how this has impacted people differently. How do you feel like you've been able to, cope with this? And what has been, I guess, the way that you've been able to positively cope with this and move on with your life and live a normal life, whereas, it's taken a turn for the worse for others?
I think I'm very, very fortunate. when, and I explained this in the second book too, and that is that we were sent home with these pills, and I was to take 3 a day, one with each meal. And after about the third, I was given 30 days off duty to recover because we were hurt. And I'm taking these pills, and about the third day, my wife comes to me and says, I think these pills are making you stupid. And, I couldn't dispute that. I couldn't balance my checkbook. I was, kicked back watching cartoons, which was out of character for me. I wasn't myself. And I said, because I've always trusted her, we've been together 47 years. And I said, well, not that date, but not back then. But back then I knew she was a very bright woman. And she says, I think these pills are making you stupid. And we came up with a plan. And that was with every meal, I would flush one down the toilet. Because the first night that I was sent home with that medicine, that very first evening, there was a knock at my door about 6:30 in the evening. And it was an RN, a registered nurse, who introduced herself as Janet. She wore no name tag. She wore no insignia of rank. And she said, I'm here to do your pill count. And I'm like, pill count? And she says, yes. She said, I just need your bottle of medicine. The doctor just wants to make sure you're taking your medicine as prescribed. Now, she never once asked me how you feeling, or took my blood pressure, took my pulse, nothing like that. But she counted all those pills, made sure that I took them. And, fortunately, she came the same time every night. So that, and I asked my wife, well, what'll I do if she wants to see me take a pill? And she says, well, you tell her you just took one. You want me to take another one? And then she says, if she presses you, put it between your gum and your cheek and take a sip of water and call it good, So, and that never happened. She never asked, but she came every night for 14 nights to, count my medication. I just wonder what kind of mental state I'd have been in if I'd taken all 14 days of those pills. And I look at the struggles that Toby had and how that medication, whatever it was, I think it was poison, how that may have exacerbated whatever he had to cope with mentally. I felt like I fared better because I had a supportive spouse who understood and was there and witnessed the after effects of the thing. She wasn't there with us at Devil's Den, but she witnessed what happened to me and, took care of me when I'd wake up screaming in the middle of the night. And so I'm very fortunate that, what else is fortunate is I'm able to recall a lot of this. And I think that, for people that have their memory repressed and stuffed down into their unconscious, I was a psychology undergrad, but, I didn't get a master. I didn't go any further than that. It was just a BS in psychology and in the law school. So I'm not qualified as a therapist or a doctor or anything, but of the sort. But just an observation for what it's worth. And that is, I think that if you stuff that stuff down into your subconscious, and it's a screen memory that you can't pull up, those things can trickle up into your conscious mind and cause you problems that you're going to have to deal with. And Toby fell into alcoholism, and his wife came to visit us. They broke up. She remarried. They divorced. She divorced Toby and remarried, and they visited us in Michigan. And she told me about Toby's drinking habits, and it wasn't, he wasn't like hang around at the bar kind of guy. When I knew him, he might drink a can of beer while we're playing cards or barbecuing or something, but I never saw him drink more than one, maybe one and a half. I certainly never saw the man drunk. But she said that, and I can relate to this, and a lot of people tell me they can relate to this, and that is that, it's hard to go to sleep. The night is not your friend. When you lay down and go to sleep, you're vulnerable. And if you've had an experience like this, when you're asleep, that's when the monsters can come visit you. I don't want to sound flip about it, but that's the way it feels. And getting a good night's sleep has always been a challenge. And I had my struggles with that too. And in the 80s and 90s, they prescribed benzodiazepines and the like, and I could see that, I could take those for a while, but then, my, I'd need more and more to get me to sleep. And I thought, this is a slippery slope. I'm not going to go there. Finally, I settled on a 25 milligram tablet of diphenhydramine or Benadryl, and that's what I take for sleep. I have to sleep with a light on. I sleep with earphones in, and I listen to meditative apps, and that's the only way that I can rest or sleep during the daytime.
And Terry, I wanted to ask you, similar to Travis Walton. Travis Walton eventually one day, and I watched this in the Travis documentary. He traveled back to the site where he was taken aboard the craft, and I think he had some mixed emotions about doing it. And they were filming, and he was talking about what had occurred. Did you ever travel back to Devil's Den or ever consider traveling back to that site, or will you not go back?
Prior to writing the second book, I was pretty adamant that I would never go back. But I've kind of changed that thought. I had a gentleman who doesn't live far from me. He lives up in Grapevine in Texas, and his story is in my book. And he's one of the 30 people in the book. His name is Billy Hallman. He's 80 years old, and he admits so in his book. I'm not saying anything that he wouldn't want me to say. And he had experience as a cartographer and, a map maker. And from the satellite images, he was able to determine that we would have had to have made about 20 correct turns from the campsite, from the park entrance to the plateau. Because the plateau, you can't really tell in that overhead picture. If you look at the picture from the side view, you can see that plateau is exactly as tall as the surrounding forest. So when you're walking around in that plateau, you're looking at the treetops, at the tops of trees. So it's not visible unless you're right up on it. And we would have had to made something like 20 correct turns, one wrong turn, and we would have went, we could have had to drive, hours or days to find this place. And what freaked me out was Toby knew where to turn. Make a right here, make a left here, make a right here, go this way. That's been all these years I've wondered about that. Was he under their influence? Was he working in concert with them? I don't know, but I knew this. He knew how to get to that plateau. And, we didn't get there by accident.
And you made your way out of there at night, which is pretty amazing too.
Oh, absolutely. It's insane. Now, I will say this, that while he's telling me turn left, turn right, he's got a little pencil and a bank envelope from my glove box, and he made some notes as we're going. So when it came time to get out of there, I said, I didn't want to leave the tent. I wanted to stay in the tent, and said, we'll leave here whenever morning comes, because, it's just a piece of canvas over my head, but I feel secure in here. I don't feel so secure outside.
Yeah.
I don't know if I mentioned this last time we talked or not, but to this day, I won't cut across an open field. I'll walk a mile and a half around if I have to, but I can't do it. I can't walk across an open field because I feel vulnerable.
Yeah. Interesting. And I wanted the other thing I wanted to ask, because you had this, going back to Sue, you later referred to as Betty, you had this kind of affinity towards, or, kind of this maternal kind of, you felt like she kind of had this maternal quality to her. But did she ever, maybe this is the $1 million question, I don't know, and maybe a lot of abductees ask this, but what the purpose was for you being taken? Was that ever communicated to you in any way? Any hints about what the ultimate aim was in you being taken?
Never. I recall once asking her when she visited me in October 2017, as I described in the first book. I asked her the question, is this here about these, are you here tonight about these things in my leg? And she said, yes. And I said, well, what are they there for? What do they do? And she completely dodged the question and said, well, they serve many purposes. That's not an answer. That's as
Right.
good as you can get. So I can only tell you what I intuit from it, and that is that, they track me, monitor me. I got to draw a correlation between, tagging a lion on a Serengeti plane and putting something on that tracks its movements. And but I imagine it's probably much more sophisticated than that. I don't know why statistical data on me would be anything, I'm an average person. I don't know what that would give them. But that's, I'm not alone here. There are a lot of people out there that have the same thing. I got a letter from a woman who, I didn't include it in the book, but I got an email from a woman who said that she had this pounding headache that went on for like 2 days, and she made an appointment to see her doctor, and was just going out of her mind with pain. And she said she was in her bathroom in front of the mirror, and that she blew her nose, and a big clot of blood came out of her nose. And like anybody would, she looked at it. And there was a small, about half the size of a standard BB, a little silver bead in the middle of that blood. And she reached over, dropped it in the toilet, and flushed it without even thinking. And as soon as it was gone, she's like, oh my God, what did I do that for? I should have saved that for my doctor to see.
Right.
But she didn't. And her headache went away, and she was fine.
That's interesting. And I think I mentioned that I had Stephen Bassett on the show the last episode. Of course, Stephen's been in D.C. fighting for disclosure for many, many years. How encouraged are you, or maybe not so encouraged, depending on your viewpoint, of current events on, now a lot of people say UAP. I guess we're not supposed to say UFO anymore. I say UFO. But I guess there's some stigma attached with that. And so Luis Elizondo and the TTSA guys now like the term UAP. There's been a lot happening on that front. There's the UAP Task Force that was set up by DOD. Yes. They owe a report to Congress by June about their findings. Even Senator Marco Rubio, head of the Senate Intel Select Committee on Intelligence, has spoke out about this matter. Things are kind of moving slowly. It would seem, at least, are moving in that direction. Are you encouraged? Where do you kind of sit on this right now?
Well, I got a couple of kind of mixed thoughts. Real quick, the TTSA guys, in April of 2018, I got a call. I pick up my phone and it says Los Angeles, and I answer it, and it's Tom DeLonge. And he said, "Hi, Terry, it's Tom DeLonge." And I'm like, "How you doing, Tom?" And I'm embarrassed to say I didn't know who he was. I mean, I should have known. We played.
You're not a Blink 182 fan, then.
When we played his music at my daughter's wedding, I mean, I didn't make the connection. I didn't know who he was. So I said, "Well, hi, Tom. How are you?" And he said, "I'm fine. Hey, I'm sitting here with Lou Elizondo and Steve Justice, and we want to talk to you about the things in your leg." And they talked about having Lou come out to visit me, and which he did eventually. But before that, they sent a doctor to visit me. I won't use his name because he was very kind to me and asked me not to. But he was able to get some new x-rays of my leg, triangulate the things that are in my leg, and determine that they are. He was also of help. I was only able to get 3 x-rays, and he was able to find that they actually took 24. And
oh, wow.
was able to help me get some more images. Nothing any more dramatic than what we have. But it's just the fact that, I was told that that's all that there were in existence, that they didn't have anymore. And they had a whole lot more. they gave me kind of a runaround when I was trying to get my X-rays. And finally, I went down to the basement of the VA hospital and asked to speak to the records custodian. And I said, I've requested my medical records from you. I'm entitled to get them under federal law, and I want copies of my X-rays, and I want you to have them in 72 hours, or I'm going to file an action against you personally and against the Veterans Administration and United States District Court in Dallas, because I know how to do that. And
yes, you're lawyer.
and they said, okay. And they called me the next day and said, Mr. Lovelace, we have your films for you if you'd like to pick them up. And I said, that's very kind. Thank you very much. I will, and I did. But Tom DeLonge and To the Stars Academy has gone through some kind of transitional change, I guess.
Yeah, and the announcement was that Louis Elizondo is leaving TTSA, I believe, along with Chris Mellon. And Steve Bassett's comment on that was that it only makes sense. They are now involved in interfacing directly with Congress, trying to set up more congressional hearings, and it's kind of hard for them to do that when they are directly associated with TTSA, and you've got stockholders and all that kind of stuff, and shareholders and that quarter. So to him, it just made sense. It was kind of the natural progression. TTSA had served its purpose for them to get this information out, and now it's kind of the next evolution, the next phase of what they're planning on doing, which he thinks is ultimately going to be open public congressional hearings. Now, that may be optimistic. I'm not sure whether that's going to happen anytime soon. I've always said I'm cautiously optimistic about this, but he seems to think that it's sooner than later that this is going to happen. So
I would agree with that. And I would also think that whatever happens, Lou Elizondo is going to be an integral part of it. And I think that's kind of obvious. There's something else that happened December 8th that comes into play. And that was an article that I first read in the Jerusalem Post. This is a reputable newspaper. And the December 8th edition spoke about a disclosure by Haim Eshed, who is the Israeli, he was the in charge of space defense for Israel. And he served in that position as a general and left after 30 years of service, and then went and taught at university for 10 years. I have friends in Tel Aviv that I called, and they're like, "Oh yeah, Haim Eshed, he's like the Buzz Aldrin of Israel. He's a well-respected guy. He's a credible guy. He's not some kook." And he came out and said that there's an alliance. I thought it was a poor choice of words. He used the word Galactic Federation. And that's a little too sci-fi-ish for my taste. But,
it kind of almost sounds Star Trek-ish.
It does. And it kind of takes away from the veracity, the credibility of the thing. But if that's what it is, that's what it is. And he said that Israel, the United States, and this Galactic Federation are all in a treaty together, and that there's a free exchange of information and goods. I'd like to know what the goods are. I'd like to know what the information is. He also said that the United States president, which was, of course, Donald Trump at the time, had plans on making a public disclosure, and that, quote, that the Galactic Federation dissuaded him from doing that.
Right, saying that people are not ready to hear this, right?
What's the interesting part about that? There's 5 words in that. And I read that article, I bet 10 times, because if you really want to understand something, that's what you got to do. That's what I got to do anyway. I got to read it 10 times and pick it apart. And that's what I did. And there's 5 words in there that bug me. And that is that, Haim Eshed said that there should be no disclosure. Humanity's not ready until they understand, and here it is, the nature of space and spaceships. And I thought, huh? And this guy may be credible, but that just doesn't ring right to me. I don't know. What do we have to learn? What do we have to know about the nature of space and spaceships? That we can't know. I mean, what's it going to do? Is it going to be riots in the streets of Hong Kong and New York or something? Or I'd like to know what. Tell me more. That's not enough information. The nature of space and spaceships doesn't make sense to me.
Right.
But other than that, the article makes me, like you said, cautiously optimistic that we're close to something happening.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it does beg the question, this report coming out, is it going to be very whitewashed? Is it going to be very boring? Is it just going to say, yeah, we've had more encounters. We don't know what these things are. We're still looking into it. That is all, Or is it going to be a little bit more detailed than that? Question, you wonder if we're just going to get another one of these kind of whitewashed reports, and all the details are going to be hidden in classified programs, and all the juicy, more intimate details about these encounters are going to be hidden away. I don't know. Steve Bassett seems to think that we're getting close to this, and there's just too much inertia. These congressional hearings are going to happen, but that remains to be seen. We know closed door hearings have happened with the pilots from the Nimitz. I don't know if some of the 2015 the pilots that were involved in the 2015 encounter have also testified. I'm not sure on that one.
The intelligence officer aboard the Roosevelt during the 2015 gimbal event read my book and emailed me, and his story is in the back of my new book, The Reckoning. And he like John Bolton wrote the book I Was in the Room or something about Donald Trump when he was defense advisor, and before he could publish the book, it had to be vetted by the CIA. Was present during the gimbal event and wanted to write a book about it. And he called me and told me, he says, I can't talk to you about it until they approve my manuscript.
Right.
But he, and I could get him if you ever want to have him as a guest. Let me know, because he tells an incredible story. He said that he says that he was 4 years away from retirement, 4 years away from military retirement, and he said, I just couldn't work for these people. He said, I know what they know, and I know that what they know needs to be public. The public has to hear this. They need to know. And he says, yeah, I can't work for these people anymore. And he quit. He quit his job 4 years from retirement.
Wow.
He got his manuscript. They redacted all of it. I mean, everything that had to do with the gimbal event, they redacted. But what he does have, so he can't talk about it. But the story he can talk about. I mean, he can talk about it anecdotally. Yeah, he was aboard the ship. Yeah, he saw pilots. Yeah, he did this, he did that. But as far as what happened, he can't tell us. And that's a shame. But what happened was, after he had that event, he said it was like it opened a door because he started having all of these paranormal events happening in his life. So,
and you do hear of people who have these encounters that they seem to have more of these kind of experiences after having these encounters. It's not like this is an isolated case. You hear of this happening with others who have either had abduction accounts, they've been experiencers, and it kind of seems to expand their horizons, and some of them seem to have, these new kind of spiritual kind of experiences, if you will.
And I've experienced that myself. My wife and I have experienced that. We had television in the living room turn itself on at 2 a.m. I mean, that's just poltergeist-like. I mean,
yeah.
Inanimate objects move, and that shouldn't happen. And and I've seen, UFOs, and it seems like every time I have one of these events or one of these things happen, I'll just call it intuition is through the roof and spot on. For instance, a couple of years ago, right about the time I published the book, which wasn't that long after I had that encounter with Betty, I went to buy some birdseed, and make a long story short, I gave her some money to buy a 25-pound bag of birdseed, and she's like, "Oh, I'm out of nickels, and can I give you pennies?" And I'm, "Yeah, sure, whatever." And she gave me some pennies, and as soon as they touched my hand, I knew that there was a wheat penny. When I say wheat penny, for those who might not know, prior to 1959, the reverse side of the Lincoln penny had, it said 1 cent in the middle and had wheat grease around the side of it, where now there is the Lincoln Memorial. They changed the coin. So those coins prior to 1959 are referred to as wheat pennies because of the shafts of wheat on the reverse side. And as soon as it touched I'm not a coin collector or anything, I just happen to know that. And as soon as the change touched my hand, I knew there was one in there. And but I'm in line with people. I got a bag on my shoulder, and I stuffed it into my pocket, and I went home and didn't think about it till I got home. I pulled the change out to throw it in my change jar, and when I did, the thought crossed my mind again. I opened my hand, and there was a 1955 wheat penny in my mix. And I thought,
we always refer to those as wheatbacks.
Wheatbacks. I've heard that too. Yeah.
Yes.
And what's great is it was the same year of my birth. It was 1955, the year I was born.
Well, Terry, it's been another fascinating conversation. It's been great talking with you. We're getting a little short on time here. Really enjoyed the new book. I'll flash. Let's share the screen here, and I'll flash a copy of the book up here, so that if anybody wants to go on Amazon, check out the new book. There it is. There's the cover. Devil's Den, The Reckoning. Where else can people find your work, Terry?
It's on Amazon.
So just go to Amazon. There it is.
Yep. Yeah, I didn't get a call from Simon Schuster, so it's on Amazon. But it did hit #1 in new releases and was a #1 bestseller. It's, I think, #4 today in the ranking. It bounces back and forth, but it's been very well received, and I'm very grateful. Hope people enjoy it.
Yeah, great book. Looking forward to getting into some of those stories of the folks that shared encounters with you. I know you got a lot of them in there, but I'm really looking forward to kind of delving into some of those when I have time. So, hey, Terry, really appreciate you joining me once again. I know it's getting late your time. Again, congrats on the success of the new book, and
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with all of us.
Anytime. It's always fun. I enjoyed it very much. Thanks, Curry.